the answer to the question, what is the role, if any, of government in education, my philosophical position, there should be no role for government education, neither funding nor regulation nor provision. I'm James Tooley. I'm the Vice-Chancellor, which is equivalent to President. I'm the Vice-Chancellor of the University of Buckingham in England. It's funny how just some questions inspire you, and that was a question that always bothered me when I was younger, and that was the question of my PhD. And of course, that was the question posed by Milton Friedman in his very famous 1955 paper, The Role of Government in Education. And Friedman came down very much in favour of vouchers, as you know, that the idea the government shouldn't run schools, it shouldn't regulate them too much, but it should provide funding, vouchers for each individual child, so that everyone would have access to the schooling that was available. No one would be deprived. But later on, I found that Milton Friedman actually changed his mind about vouchers. He changed his mind because he read the work of Dr. E.G. West, Professor Edwin George West, who at the time was at Carleton University in Ottawa. And Eddie West showed that before government got involved, there was more or less universal private education from church, from charity, but also from for-profit, low-cost private education. And the famous Newcastle Commission report of 1861, it found that, yes, it did a very thorough investigation of the whole of England and Wales, taking sampling. It was a very sophisticated piece of work. And they found that around 95% of kids were in school for around 5.7 years. So in 1833, the government started giving small grants to the schools that were existing. So the government got involved not because there was a dire need. The government got involved because there were a suggestion the schools were low quality, but more likely they just wanted control. And I then started looking for, okay, if it was happening in Victorian England and Wales, if these schools were emerging, could it be the same in India? Could it be the same in Africa now? I found the same phenomenon, that schools were being created in a whole range of price points. And how I defined low cost, that if a family, a poor family on the poverty line, could afford to send all their children to a private school without spending more than 10% of their total income, that school I defined it as low tuition, low cost. The key point is schools have emerged in a market in countries like Nigeria, like India, which cater for all levels of affordability. Just like parents want to feed and clothe and house their children, parents want to educate their children. It's a very normal thing to do. And they will do that within the private sector, producing the public good or the externalities of education. And it's not that there's no schools you can go to, it's just that parents don't want to send their children there. They have a sense of responsibility. I think it's a good thing. They have a sense of responsibility for their children. They know what goes on in those public schools, don't like it, and see what goes on in their neighbourhood, low-cost private schools, and they much prefer that. And they can choose from many different schools. So they're not sort of forced to go to this school or the public school. They can go to this school, this school, this school, this school, this school. And they have a way of choosing. The private schools, particularly the private for-profit schools, they're the ones that have caused the growth. They're the ones that have caused almost exponential growth. And it's amazing. You saw schools in tents, schools just under trees, schools in very makeshift buildings. But that is a response of parents. They want their kids to go to school. If the government's not doing it, as in those war-torn countries, they will do it. But the fact they do it anyway suggests government isn't the right way to go about getting education for children. By abolishing the Federal Department of Education, you are not going to abolish education. You're going to allow a little bit more freedom to emerge. How I approach this subject in a few books and articles is to say, so what are the justifications? So I start with as it were an empty plate. I've seen places without government education, and historically we see that. So clearly education by the state is not a necessary thing that must happen. So without the state, you seem to have good things going on. So what are the justifications? And typically the justifications are things like equality. They are to do with democracy. You don't get these justifications now, but in the past they were to do with getting a well-educated workforce, or a well-educated or a sufficiently educated armed force. Then there are justifications about the public good of education, the externalities and so on. So what I've just done is I've looked at each of these and asked the question, is government any good at doing that? So like the equality one, no, it doesn't seem to be very good at all. And secondly, asked the counterfactual, if the government wasn't involved, then would the private sector, the spontaneous order, would that be any better? And so my books on the subject say the balance of probabilities. I think government is not necessary, is actually quite harmful, and the counterfactual of the spontaneous order is likely to be better than those. That's the way I've sort of approached the issue. And so the answer to the question, what is the role, if any, of government education? My philosophical position, there should be no role for government education, neither funding nor regulation nor provision.